Hello everyone, welcome back to the evolution of horror. This week we received some sad news that friend of the podcast, journalist, writer, all-round wonderful person, Charlie Allbright, passed away. Charlie was one of the smartest, funniest and most wonderfully eccentric people I ever had the pleasure of knowing and calling a friend. And I was honoured to have him as a guest on this podcast 4 times in the last year. Anyone who knew Charlie knew that he was the world's biggest fan of Stephen King's It. He had just finished writing an 80,000 word book on It and its various adaptations. This thing was a real labour of love for Charlie, and it was a book that sadly he never actually got to see finally published. But I thought this was a good opportunity to, in Charlie's memory, release an episode that I recorded with him, which was only previously released on Patreon. So ahead of It Chapter 2 back in September, me and Charlie sat down and we discussed his love for the text and all the previous adaptations. The conversation went out on Patreon back in September, and I'm going to play it for you now in full. And this hasn't been in any way re-edited since it first went out. Before we get into the chat, I just want to reiterate some information that's important at this time of year especially, and it was the last thing that Charlie posted on Twitter before we lost him. This is a hard time of year for a lot of people. Contact a Samaritan. If you need someone to talk to, they listen, they won't judge or tell you what to do. Call them anytime, day or night. Whatever you're going through, you can call for free on 116 123. That's the Samaritans on 116 123. Charlie Allbright, welcome back. Hello.
Well, hello there. How are we?
That's so good. So good to have you back. We talked last time you were on the podcast about zombie flesh eaters, but we did do a little bit of teasing about, we did a bit of It chat at the beginning of our episode because you're somewhat of an expert, I hope you don't mind me saying, on Stephen King's It. I mean, tell us a little bit about your kind of background with this first story. In case anyone didn't listen to that chat, you've just finished a whole book on the novel, right?
Just slightly. It is 80,000 bloody words long.
Oh my God.
Absolutely enormous, and it is absolutely everything It, right from the beginning in the context of how Stephen King wrote it, through to the book, the miniseries, the audiobooks, because there ain't just one, folks. Oh my God. And right through to the films and fan cultures. So the whole damn kit and caboodle, including interviews with some of the actors, the crew, and a world-first experiment on eye tracking.
We are going to try and get through, as best we can, It, the book. We're going to talk about the miniseries. We're going to talk a little bit about the audiobook, because why not? And we'll talk about It Chapter 1 before we then, hopefully at some point, do a follow-up chat after we've both seen It Chapter 2. Because at this point, recording this, we haven't yet seen It Chapter 2. We're both chomping at the bit, aren't we, to
Can you die a fanboy?
Exactly. So, first of all, I want to know, where did your kind of, where did this fandom, where did this obsession with It begin for you? Like, have you always been a fan of the book?
It's the first King book I read. Basically, very typical loser story. My family had been transplanted to the middle of sodding nowhere, and I was incredibly isolated. I ended up being made to go and do drama to try and prevent the shyness. Yeah. And I ended up at a summer camp, and I read it there in a place that was remarkably like the Barrens, which literally just occurred to me this morning. I thought, you fucking idiot, that's where it's come from. Yeah. And basically, it was the first, where I went to school, it was a place where you went where you were considered a bit thick. I failed an exam called the 11 Plus, which the older people amongst us may remember. You literally went in school, took it when you were 11, and if you passed, you were smart. If not, you weren't. And I sat and read this book, and I started actually looking at things like the different texts he talks about and reading up on it, and all of a sudden I realised I wasn't doing anything different to what the kids at the clever school were doing. And it literally changed the entire course of my life, because I am now a PhD. I thought my way through.
Yeah. We're going to start with the basics. How would you, it's an epic book, so it's a difficult thing to summarise, but what's the story, generally speaking, of It? How would you describe it if you were to sum it up?
Action-wise, basic gist is you've got 2 little brothers who are playing. One of them's poorly and says, right, why don't we make you a boat, to the little brother. Little brother goes out with boat, loses it in a storm drain, and promptly gets killed by a big nasty. And the story, in one sense, is about the elder brother trying to get over his guilt at the fact that the younger brother has been killed and trying to actually, avenge him and stop this beastie from killing all the other people it can get a hold of.
Yeah.
That's the basic action plotline. However, in terms of what it's actually about, to me, it's always been a story about grief. Not grief for the kid who dies, but for the kid who lives. Because Bill is he's a very macabre, very miserable character. Always is, right from the word go. Yeah. And yes, he has his moments of being silly and being happy, but it's basically about how he learns to live with himself. And that's actually within the other story, which is narrated by the character of Mike Hanlon, who acts as, he's basically a historian.
Yeah.
And the whole way through the book, through the original book, you have sections called the interludes, which are basically Mike's diaries. Yes. And he talks about the history of racial segregation in America and how, regardless of the clown, we are really, really bad at just getting along together. And so the whole book actually becomes about how you get a group of incredibly disparate people and you learn to live together.
That's right. Yeah, and that's really fascinating because you got through about 80% there of your synopsis without even mentioning a clown, right? Which I think is really interesting because I think what a lot of people will probably associate it with, and I think what maybe, and we'll talk about the film, but I think it's maybe become the story about the scary clown. But actually, it's quite a lot more than that, isn't it? And it's been a while since I haven't had time to reread the book, and I haven't read it since I was at school. So it's a bit of a distant memory for me, the book, but I loved it. But I'm right in thinking, aren't I? The clown isn't actually it's not the monster of it, really, is it? It's not just about a clown.
No, I mean, to me, I'll be honest, Pennywise never scared me, ever.
Right, yeah.
What scared me is the fact that the real danger of this book is not only the people of Derry, but to the kids themselves. It's because they are driving themselves insane.
Yeah.
They are all, before they begin, they're incredibly isolated, and they're literally they're driving themselves crackers because they can't get out of their own individual hells of loneliness. Yeah. And as a result, I mean, it's interesting that when you look at how Pennywise turns up, with the exception of the first killing of Georgie, the way he generally goes after them is, again, the whole thing about you're attacked by your own worst fears. It sounds so pat, but he doesn't need to do anything else. And in fact, a lot of the way that he's actually shown in the book, it's not necessarily always big nasty monsters. There's a few times where you just see a mummy, but he doesn't get in their face and go "Rah!" Instead, he just goes, "I'm sorry, that was probably in your ear."
That was slightly painful, but that's fine. Carry on.
So listen, just saw the minutest little squint.
Yes, like, ooh, okay, yeah.
Instead, I mean, you see bits where, for example, Ben sees the mummy. The mummy doesn't come running after him. It just literally looks at him.
Yes.
And it's more about what the mummy symbolises. The one that actually does the chasing, really, there's a sequence which sort of makes it into the film, whereby Eddie sees a leper.
Yes.
And in the book, it's far more about a dialogue that's become really badly blown out of proportion, actually, whereby it chases him and says, "Eddie, do you want a BJ?"
Right.
And it becomes far more about what actually makes him a loser, because one of the big points of my book is saying that actually people really make huge assumptions about what each of these kids are about, whereas if you actually read the text, it's very often not actually clear how they see themselves, let alone how they're seen by other people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's so much going on with these characters, isn't there? How old were you when you first... Were you a kid when you first read it? Or?
I just turned 14.
Right, yeah. Because probably perfect age in a way, isn't it? That's another interesting thing with this book, I think, and this story is that, I guess it's aimed for, is there something that kids can get out of this as much as adults? Is it too dark for kids, in your opinion? I mean, what's the kind of, what is the ideal age to read it, would you say?
For me, I very much thought literally my age, because I mean, any younger, like if you go to like 11, 12, which is how old they are in the book, it's almost a little bit too young. I mean, King actually makes the point in the book whereby you have... the kids end up discussing about how you become pregnant. Yeah. And they actually have this discussion whereby they're told about this kid who supposedly knows that a boy gets a girl and squirts jism.
Yes.
The scientific term he actually says, in her belly button.
Right, yeah.
The whole idea being that At 11, generally, you're just beginning to get your idea around the basics, and often very, very badly wrong. And it's about that huge learning curve you get in those adolescent years.
Yes, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it does have that kind of like, you know, Goonies-esque childhood kind of tale about it, but there's something almost Amblin about it in some ways when you look at the films and the adaptations. But then also there is that real dark undercurrent going under it, isn't there? That I think you will only get watching it again or reading it again as an adult.
Oh god, yeah. I mean, particularly, people talk. It amazes me. I mean, people talk about a sequence in the book whereby. There is basically a sewer orgy. The kids all get together and have sex together, which is really badly misrepresented by people who don't know the book. And yet, one of the big things that when I first reread it, when I got the book deal went over, is a sequence that you actually see in the trailer for the first film where Bev goes back to her old home. That is... I found that a lot worse because she gets chased around the house by this old woman who is turning into Pennywise, who starts screaming that she wants to suck her cunt.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, your eyebrows have just gone into your hair.
I know. It's amazing. I think it's easy to forget, I think, with it, that there is all of that very adult subtext going on, which is what's clever about it, I suppose, and what's brilliant about it. I mean, do you think it seems to be one of King's most sort of beloved, sort of most celebrated works now. Do you think that's true? Is it your favourite Stephen King novel, would you say?
Oh, by a long way. King novel by a long way. It's because yes, it has the Goonies-esque quality, yes, we know, but it's far more, it's a very honest discussion of trauma and how things don't suddenly get better. Yeah. You learn to live with them, you don't get over them. Yeah. And because of that, I've just, all the shiz with the scary clown, it doesn't matter. What ends up pulling them through is their imaginations. They have to imagine their way out. Yeah. And that is something that is actually ultimately very realistic. Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose, if you are a kid who is in any way you consider yourself an outsider or something, I think there's something really, wholesome and great to kind of grasp in this novel, I think, as well, isn't there? You're likely to be able to associate or connect with one of those 7 kids as well, which is really nice. They're all different enough, but they're all kind of recognisable characters in some ways, aren't they? Oh, very much so. I mean, one thing that King is infamous for doing is basing the individual characters on people. I mean, if you take Bill, for example, King has actually said in the past, it's very obvious that Bill is actually in part based on Peter Straub. The red hair is all there, and the whole thing, the first thing you learn about Bill right at the beginning is that his stutter was caused because he was knocked over by a car when he was 3. And the same damn thing happened to Straub. That's really interesting, because I used to think, just from watching the miniseries and stuff, that maybe it was loosely based on King himself, because he ends up becoming a horror writer and all of that kind of thing. I wondered if there was any way that King himself kind of, based any of that character on him. There's a large part in which, using kind of mythological structures, he does, because he makes sure that he becomes the kind of quasi-hero. Yes. But then again, Bill isn't always a hero. I mean, one of the problems I have with a lot of the adaptations is that it makes Bill out to be this knight in shining armour, and yet one of the bits in the book which I love is there's a section in which Bill actually says they're all looking to him as a leader, and he says, here I am standing in the barrens pretending to be King Arthur, waving around a shitty little tin sword. Am I just a selfish little shit? Yeah. And he realises, it's one thing I think I saw on an article on Den of Geek the other day, they, yes, you could argue that they have all been chosen by Pennywise because so have all the others, people who've read the book. Eddie Corcoran, for God's sake, Adrian Mellon, they're all people who also saw the clown. The reason those kids are there is because they chose it. Echoes of Harry Potter, hello. Yeah, right, yeah. And he literally makes a thing of, Bill actually makes a thing in sequences such as a photo album, where Pennywise comes to them from, they're all sitting and looking at a photo album, he reaches out to them. Yes. Stan says over and over ad nauseum, I didn't want to see it. Yes. And Bill says, you did. You are here, and he makes him stay.
Interesting. That's really interesting. So let's talk about Pennywise himself then. Pennywise is, I think, the kind of iconic figure from this book, it feels like. I just want to ask you briefly about clowns. I mean, why are we so scared of clowns? What makes clowns creepy, in your opinion?
On an aesthetic level, it's a dual nature. In other words, you've got probably an adult who is somebody who is in control.
Yes.
Yet they're wearing a silly costume, so it's okay, they're disobeying social norms. Does this mean I have to play along? Do they have license? Can I stop them? The way in which they use authority completely muddles the way we think about how we can behave civilly as a society. And the thing is with clowns, because they're about showing the ridiculousness of life, they suggest that all the rules we thought we had are null and void. I mean, they actually came out of religious cultures, whereby they were used as, the courtroom joker, the one who had license to say to the king, "Sorry, mate, you're being a dick."
Yeah, right.
And there's partly that. It's also partly, cultural. I mean, when you think of killer clowns, scary clowns, people like John Wayne Gacy.
Yes.
It does very much come back to that.
So John Wayne Gacy, the real-life serial killer serial killer child molester dressed as a clown, that's right, isn't it? And kidnapped a whole bunch of kids.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, this dude, he was a pillar of the community. There are photos of him at Republican fundraising events standing with Nancy Reagan. He was a local businessman, and yet he was found eventually having killed 33 young men who were basically his employees, half of which he actually put underneath his crawl space in his house. So he basically slept on top of these dead kids.
Jesus.
And this is the thing, if clowns were the kind of characters you would assume were, you knew where they were coming from, but the thing is they're not. It's this whole thing of hiding within plain sight.
That's it, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, Gacy, it's not that it was just his way of having a bit of fun. He used to go into kids' hospitals and do charity events dressed as his character, Pogo the Clown.
Ooh.
People loved him until they realised his house started smelling a bit off, and it probably wasn't chicken.
Oh, God. That is, terrifying, isn't it? Jeez. It's really interesting. And I think, now often we think of one of the most famous creepy clowns in cinema as Pennywise, I would say. Whether or not it's Tim Curry or Bill Skarsgård, I guess it depends on your generation and which one you see first and everything else, but it's definitely Pennywise as a character. And we touched upon this briefly, but the characters in, the Loser Club, do you have any favourites and why?
Oh, hell, there's the golden question. When I was a kid, it would very definitely have been Bill, because just the idea, because I'd originally grown up reading my grandma's old kind of 50s kids annuals. Really, well, older than 50s actually, really, really old. And it was all, people go treasure hunting and stuff like that. It's like, you vomit slightly. And I was a macabre little git.
I can't believe that, Charlie. No.
I was early on really obsessed by death. I can remember the first proper conversation I ever remember having with my mother was asking when she would die.
Wow.
Which sounds horrible. I was terrified of the concept of it. And so Bill's internalization and sheer inwardness, I just, yes! You get me. As years have gone on, far more Mike. Because it's funny, I mean, a lot of people say that these kids are completely left to it by their parents. It's absolute rubbish if you read the book. If you look at Mike's family, they're supportive. He regularly goes on the farm with his dad, Will. They have lovely family chats. They tell each other, I love you. They go on outings together. His dad gives him wages, and they have fun.
Right.
His dad actually encourages him as he's growing up to go and search around Derry and find out for himself. His dad takes him to the local police station, where he sees the local Derry tramp chair, which was a torture device. The idea being that the dad is trying to say, son, this is what you're going to have to deal with, but in a way that isn't hate everybody.
Yeah.
And in that sense, even though as Mike gets older, he has his moments where he actually, there's a wonderful sequence where he's called the other losers back when they're adults and they've got to come back to fight it again. And he actually says, here I am, one fuck drunk N-word in the library.
Right, yeah.
And he's literally saying, why the hell did I stay? And he's angry and he's bitter, but he never loses the love. Then again, even Richie's parents, Richie's another one. There's a lovely sequence where they're all sitting around the breakfast table and they're joking about him having pocket money.
Right, yeah.
They do care. And it's just, the stories like that aren't overly abuse narratives tend to get forgotten, but they're actually quite funny. I mean, Wentworth Tozier, the dad, is hilarious.
Yeah, well, again, when you look at the adaptations, I think often the those kind of things get stripped away a bit, don't they? So that they can simplify it and streamline it a bit. And how much of this monster then is the town of Derry, I suppose? I mean, what is the monster? What is it in this story, in your opinion, would you say?
It becomes it's not even a personification of hate. It becomes a license for the people of town to behave horribly to each other, and to think that literally, I mean, this is one of the reasons why, I mean, I know there's a book that's just come out called Make America Hate Again, which is about Trump era horror. Haven't read it yet. It's literally just come out.
Okay.
And so much of it is about it's the old thing of the school bully.
Yes.
It's a case of, if you have somebody who says, yes, go ahead, you can behave like this, people will. And so much of one of the fascinating things about the book is seeing how, with the kids, Richie in the book, because he's very much a child product of 1950s TV, where attitudes were obviously hellishly wrong and hellishly different. When he starts talking to people like Mike and he says things we would now never say, using the N-word and so forth, that's kind of slightly almost passive-aggressive because he can't quite understand why it's wrong. But it's also his way of reaching out to Mike and saying, hey, you're one of us. I mean, one thing in the book that you get is he calls Ben Hanscom Haystack after Haystack Calhoun, the wrestler. He's basically saying, you're fat.
Yes.
And to us now, we think, oh my gosh, that's fat phobic, it's disgusting. It's basically he's giving a nickname and saying you're one of us. Yeah.
Well, that's it, I suppose, isn't it? Because all of these kids have that thing that makes them an outsider, whether it's the skin colour, whether it's their size, whether it's their stutter, whatever it might be. They each have one of those sort of things, don't they? Beverly's an interesting character as well, isn't she? Because I think what they pull off really well in the film, which we'll get to, is that difference in experience and body shape and everything when you're at that age, and how different and how much more grown up in some ways Beverly is as a I know that obviously that's the whole backstory with her and her dad, isn't it? That essentially she's starting to become this kind of sexual. She's starting to turn into a woman, essentially, whereas the difference between her and then some of the other boys in that group as well, and the sort of differences in that age group, I think they handle that really well with the character of Beverly.
They do. I mean, they age her up, and it's interesting because in the original book she is just beginning to become aware of it. She's a heck of a tomboy in terms of her actions, but she's also very high femme. There's lots of discussion of her going to the supermarket and buying herself ribbons for her hair, and altering her clothes. There's a lovely bit where she's before she goes, and she nearly gets in trouble with Henry because she accidentally comes upon them where they're having basically a group wank in the band. And it basically talks about how she's going along down this path, and her shorts are skimming her bum, and she knows they're too short, but she's really enjoying it, and it becomes absolutely. I mean, I actually wrote a blog on this for the University of Birmingham. It actually becomes absolutely textbook male gaze. Yes. Because it's talking from Ben's perspective, partly about how she's actually really beginning to enjoy becoming a woman. Right, yeah. And this is where the whole thing about her father comes in the sense of, when does she need to take responsibility for other people's desires? Because she is also getting into her desire with Bill. I mean, she sees the Bowers gang, to say, in a circle having. It starts off as a fart lighting session. It's hilarious. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Of course you do.
Yeah, of course I remember that. Yeah, of course.
And it ends up with Henry being masturbated by one of the other kids, and she looks into the circle, and she sees them with their pants around their ankles, and she sees what is put in italics, their things, and then thinks in this exact quote, Bill has one of those. And she's becoming aware. And the thing is, when we think of kids now, we want to have almost a Victorian appreciation. Seriously, you ask a 9-year-old what they find funny and they're going to say, willies and farts.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, it's so true. It's really interesting. How do you think King handles it well, as a male, as a bloke, writing a sort of pubescent girl? Is he good at writing female characters, would you say?
I like Bev because I always found her genuinely feisty. She's also very much a product of her time.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, some of the later stuff, like things like Mr. Mercedes and 112263, even to a certain extent Revival, which I otherwise love, he ended up doing this terrible thing where he'd set up a heroine who was almost too good to be true, although she had a little bit of spice, and then he'd fucking kill her. And it's like, dude, just concentrate what you're good at, go back to the twisted writers.
Exactly. It's so true.
But then again, I mean, I haven't read things like The Outsider, The Institute, some of the more recent ones, but when he does them well, he does them wonderfully.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. So, in general, the book, and we'll get to the adaptations, but how much better is the book than any adaptation you've seen thus far? And do you think that there is there are still elements of this book that you can't translate to screen? Is there anything about it that's unfilmable, in your opinion?
In terms of the actual, which one is the superior product?
Yes.
I will, I think, always go for the book because it is such the narrative itself, if you actually read through it, one of the big things is that a lot of it is done in thought process. In other words, you haven't got normal paragraphs. Instead, what you have is the characters, if they've suddenly got a thought appearing out of nowhere, it will appear in the middle of the page, halfway down, in italics and with no punctuation. So you're literally forced to read it. And because one thing we actually found when I did the experiment for my book, we got a load of people, including the wonderful chappie I'm talking to now.
Yeah, that's right.
To come along and read pages of the book. One group had the original text. One group had a mock-up that was done, whereby... Did you get the mock-up or the original?
I actually don't know.
Well, did you see Bill Stutter's in yours?
I did.
You got the original. The other group had a mock-up done by a graphic designer friend of mine, and Andy McKenna, whereby basically it's exactly the same material but without any of the speech alterations, the idea being that you just read it straight. And what we actually found was that people who read the original version, the one where you can see the thought process, actually took longer. And the thing is, it meant they didn't skip, because despite all the italics and wrong spellings and everything else that's in the original, they empathised more with it and they got more into the story. They didn't get put off by the fact it was hard to read.
Right.
That was actually borne out by the comments.
Yes.
And to get across, basically you have to empathise with these characters to understand the story. It puts you into their headset, and we found it actually changes your physical reactions. Your eyes take longer. So it literally changes how you react. Now, the thing is, that would be very hard to get across in a film unless you made it very artistic, because, I mean, for one thing that always tickles me, when the film came out, the original trailer, there was a massive kick-off because people said that Bill wasn't stuttering. They actually completely removed that, because obviously you ain't got too long in a trailer.
Yeah, that's right, exactly, yeah.
And it becomes, bear in mind he's meant to be the leader. It becomes a massive kind of thing against him that he has to lead without talking. He has to lead via action.
Yes.
And, so that in itself, getting across his sheer paranoia almost would be very, very hard to do. Having said that, Jaden Lieberher, now Jaden Martell, is actually very good at that. He's a very good actor, who is the Bill in the film. Yeah. In terms of things you couldn't film, everybody goes on about the child orgy.
Yes.
It is led by Bev. It is not led by the boys. She has to tell the boys to do it. She has to help them because they don't know what they're doing.
Yes.
She literally has to say to Eddie, I think you have to put your thing in me.
Yes.
And it's not done as in a voyeuristic way. Instead, a recurrent theme the whole way through the book is the idea of birds. Stan's idea of empiricism, of it isn't real.
Yes,
he has a bird book.
That's right. Yes.
And it's his way of saying, okay, this is this kind of bird, this is this kind of bird, this is in my encyclopedia, this is the way the world works. And when Bev ends up down there in the sewer talking to these kids, she literally thinks of grackles and she thinks of birds flying, and it actually becomes quite sweet because she knows she has to do something to facilitate that rite of passage. And it actually, you don't see anything nasty. I mean, I think they could film it in the sense of that you don't need to see anything. They could do it in the dark.
Yes.
And unless, like with so much of the film, unless you know what's happening,
Yeah.
it could just sound like they're holding hands.
Yes, right.
The thing you couldn't film is Patrick Hockstetter. Patrick Hockstetter, he only appears in the film version, and he is... Oh gosh, he looks like a young Nick Cave, and his name has escaped me.
I know the one you're talking. Yes.
Basically, in the book, this kid, he's meant to be about 11.
Yeah.
And he is a complete psychopath. He, in the book, he's killed his little brother Avery. He just decides he doesn't like the kid and suffocates him.
What?
Knowing damn well what he's doing. It's made very clear he knows. He's one of these joyous little delights who catches flies and keeps them in a pencil case.
Right.
He's also the one who masturbates Henry in the scene I was talking about earlier, and who Henry then punches, and he just doesn't react. He's described as being a boy of clay by his tutors who's just let go because they know he's not right, but he's not disruptive like Henry is, so he gets ignored. But the big thing they couldn't do, the thing you couldn't film aside from all that, there's a sequence where just after Bev has gone down and seen the whole fartlighting sequence, Patrick goes over to a fridge, and he opens this fridge, and it turns out there is a little puppy in it. And what he's been doing is progressively stealing all of the local neighbourhood animals, taking them to the fridge, putting them in the fridge, and basically going back like a day or two after, seeing these animals gradually freeze to death. And when he goes, it describes how he has a hard on, how it's exciting to him.
God.
Yeah, and it's incredibly disturbing because it makes it clear that he knows he's getting on with it, and this kid knows that he's scared of nothing but the idea that anything else in the world could exist apart from him, because he really is that sociopathic, that psychopathic.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening with that lovely bit is you get this really detailed description about how this dog, eventually the final day he gets out, it's barely whimpering, and he's just thinking, oh sod it, I'm gonna have to get another dog. And that's when Bev sees Pennywise get to him, and there's a horrific sequence where you get these mosquito type things coming out of the fridge, Pennywise, or rather it.
Yes.
And they basically sting him to death, and they do things like there's a lovely bit where one goes into his eyeball, and it talks about how his eyeball basically pops and slides down his face.
Wow, amazing.
It's hideous. and the thing is, that's kind of, it gives it the gory ending, but because of everything that's led up to it,
oh my God,
what ends up happening is you realise you could not, the whole thing of censorship and showing torture to animals.
Yeah.
Then with a kid,
it's hard to get that across, and with a child,
yeah, you never could, because it's made clear he knows it is completely deliberate. He's seeing how much harm he can cause. It's not shits and giggles, and he is enjoying it. And it talks so much about how, literally how he knows it's making him feel good down there.
Oh my God,
you couldn't film that.
It's so interesting, isn't it? And this is like going back to the first thing I asked you, really. Again, we'll get onto the adaptations in a minute, but the fact that people just think of this as a scary clown story, and it's clearly, from all the stuff that you've just been talking about, there's so much darker than that, isn't it? That's the thing. That's really quite disturbing, all that stuff. I don't remember any of that. And there was me, because I was going to say, actually, Henry Bowers is a character that I found almost scarier than Pennywise. But actually, it sounds like Patrick is a much scarier, even worse character than Henry in some regard. But those characters are truly frightening as well. I suppose it's the idea that it's the people of Derry that are the monsters, right? But Henry Bowers is a terrifying character.
Oh, yes, terribly so, because the whole thing, the thing that's kind of fascinating about him in the book in particular, he isn't the kind of mulleted kind of rocker kid that you see in the film. Instead, you see how deeply abused he is, but it's not done in the way, the way that Nicholas Hamilton, I'm pretty sure that's the kid's name, does it in the film. He's a brilliant actor. Yeah. And the way they actually escalate it so that he is actually being, hit by his father.
Yeah, it really works.
It's the beautiful way that it's done in the book is it's how so much abuse actually happens. Yeah. It's a gradual drip, drip, drip. It's the fact that there's a sequence where Henry, the whole thing with Mike starts because his dad is Henry's dad's incredibly racist, and coming at that particular time where there was still segregation. Mike's dad is just trying to make a life for himself, and his family's a good guy. I love Mike and his dad. And what ends up happening is Henry ends up absorbing his dad's racism to the extent that he eventually Mike's dad and Henry's dad have an altercation over some farm business because they're both farmers and stuff. And what ends up happening is that Henry's dad loses. And starts being far more, these people have no right, Right. And so to gain his approval, Henry goes and poisons Mike's dog. And then starts escalating the racial stuff towards Mike. And it's the fact that he thinks he's doing the right thing, and he gradually he gets so used to his dad's neglect. His dad has this girlfriend who every week without fail brings them a bean stew they have to eat. And there's this joke made that his dad talks about this little song, beans, the more you eat, the more you toot. And it's basically this farting thing. And you just see this kid who desperately wants love and approval, and yet is just seen as a nuisance, and as a result he starts to direct his anger to everybody else. And because of that, when you finally see the fight in the Barrens, you actually see that it is purely he's worried about losing ground. The whole gang is worried about losing ground because it actually says when the losers advance, it isn't done in this greatly heroic way that either of the visual adaptation shows. What ends up happening is all the others are getting pegged, and Bill it actually says there was a moment in the stuttering kid's eyes when they all backed off. And Bill's head literally goes down, and they're all still chucking rocks at him, and he just doesn't care anymore. He's literally thrown them back, and he just becomes this, he doesn't give a shit if he's going to die. And it's the fact that Henry is trying to get around that, and he's trying to just carve out a way for himself to move on in a way he's never going to be able to. Derry, in this sense, it's an ex-logging town. It's gradually being made more cosmopolitan, but increasingly the old town is dying.
Stephen King, he must have a real, God knows, I wonder what his school life was like, because he's got some good bullies in his books, hasn't he? If you look at Stand By Me or Carrie or these kind of like hellish adolescent kind of worlds that he creates, it's they're always pretty nasty characters, some of these bully characters.
Oh yeah, if you look at his book on writing, which actually, no, don't look at the book, get the Audible. He reads it himself, and he's hilarious.
Oh, brilliant. I'll have to listen to that. That's awesome.
It's only short as well. It's like 43 minutes long.
Amazing.
And he actually talks, he wasn't ever particularly on the receiving end of it, in the sense of his dad had left when he was very young, and he became an alcoholic very early on in life. He's obviously famous for being a complete kind of alcohol, cocaine, all the rest of it freak. And he was kind of partially insulated from that, but he talks in particular about this. There was this girl whose name I cannot remember, but who she always had really unimpressive clothing, and they start taking the mickey out of her. One day she comes in school beautifully done up. Guess where this is going, Miss Carrie White? And she comes in beautifully done up, and they keep going. And so over time she literally wears the same outfit for next 2 years. The one piece of fight she had, and they just kick it out of her. And there are a lot of similar stories of just him never really being on the receiving end, because he was a very driven kid, and his mum, by the sound of it, was absolutely amazing with him. She gave him and his brother a lot of confidence, a lot of encouragement, despite the fact she was a single parent, and she absolute world beater for him. But he talks about all these other kids who were just constantly neglected, or constantly just had the living doodah.
Right, so he kind of saw it all around him. Okay, so let's talk then. We've done a little bit of groundwork there about the book. Let's talk about the miniseries first of all.
Aren't you going to say hello? Oh, come on, bucko. Don't you want a balloon?
I'm not supposed to take stuff from strangers. My dad said so.
Very wise of your dad, Georgie. Very wise indeed. I, Georgie, am Pennywise, the dancing clown. You are Georgie. So now we know each other. T-Rex.
I guess so. I gotta go.
Go without this.
My boat!
Exactly. Go on, kiddo. Take it. Oh, you want it, don't you, Georgie? Oh, of course you do. And there's cotton candy and rides and all sorts of surprises down here. And balloons, too. All colors.
Do they float?
Oh, yes. They float, Georgie. They float. And when you're down here with me, you float too!
Do you remember your first experience of watching the mini-series? Did you watch it when it was first out, or was it later on? Or
I lived in the middle of nowhere, so
Right.
it was literally, I think it was about a year later.
yes,
And I had read the book. No, I'd not read the book so many times. I'd read it once, and it had stayed with me literally to the extent that, you know, when I went back to it 7 years later, I could still instantly find the exact page, the exact quote, the exact line.
right, wow, yeah.
Which is scary and slightly obsessive behaviour, I'll be honest.
No, I mean that's amazing. I mean, it's clearly stuck with you, didn't it? Yeah.
Just a bit. And
Yeah.
With the miniseries, I got it as soon as I found it in the library. In fact, I vaguely remember having to order it in, and
Right.
I was utterly struck by Jonathan Brandis as Bill, because he, in the first few seconds you see him where he's sitting on the bed.
So he plays the young Bill.
Yes, the young
right,
Bill,
yeah.
yes. I was, again, it was just seeing that experience, that sheer panic at living on screen. I thought it was amazing. And then seeing Tim Curry, who I'd known from Rocky Horror, because my mum had a massive crush on Frankenfurter.
Yeah, I mean, who didn't?
Well, exactly.
Come on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was, yes, in our News of the World reading household, that was a weird one. So it's like, okay, so it's like, okay, this is weird.
It's amazing. I don't care if you're a man, woman, whatever. Everyone finds Tim Curry as Frankenfurter attractive. Let's be honest.
Exactly. I mean, to me, it was seeing the action on screen, and you know, yes, it missed out some of the kind of main bits, but to my child's eyes, just seeing it there. The one thing about books, it's really weird. Books are quite secret. You are reading. You look at when Harry Potter came out. You had, you know, when they realised that adults were reading them, they made adult-specific covers.
Yeah.
And you know, the idea is you can close a damn book. Whereas I must admit, okay, this is going to get me hate mail. I hate seeing things in cinemas.
Interesting.
I find I don't like in fact, I'll be honest with you, I watched the film version of it last night with my housemate.
Yeah.
That is the first time I have ever watched that, not in a cinema and not on my own with anybody.
Right, yeah.
Because I find watching films that I actually care about to be an intensely personal experience.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's true. You almost don't want to watch it with other people in case they don't react in the way you do and stuff. You know? Yeah, I'm with you there, definitely. Especially horror films. I think I often find there's more power to watching it on your own.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's to me, with the miniseries, it was literally, the thing I loved about it was that it makes it very family friendly. It makes it so that because they knock off a lot of the gore. I mean, one thing that Stacey Abbott says in, I think, her book, along with her co-author on TV horrors, is that the first bit with Georgie, for example, where the clown rips his arm off, you don't see, all you see is a bit of the clown's mouth. You see the teeth, and then it cuts straight to the funeral.
Yes, it does. Yeah, it is. I first watched it before I'd read the book. I was very young. I was in primary school. Yeah. Watched it at a sleepover with some friends. There were 4 of us, and we watched the whole 3 hours. And one of us, my friend, was so scared, whose house we were in, he had to go upstairs and sleep in his parents' bed that night, and left the other 3 of us downstairs in the living room. Because obviously, when you're a kid, it's the most terrifying thing ever. And Tim Curry is phenomenal, and I think he was so scary actually as Pennywise, because there's something weirdly, he's less overtly monstrous than Bill Skarsgård, isn't he?
Oh, completely. I mean, he said that he based the character on the old comics you used to get in the Catskills Mountains. And so there is this, I mean, kind of fess up time, I occasionally do kind of performance with kids, like storytelling and stuff.
Awesome, cool.
Which is weird, and it's one of the kind of things you tend to get with kids. Sometimes you've got to rib them a bit, because you're trying to get them to come out themselves. I mean, when he first says, "Hiya, Georgie, how are you?" He's literally, how would you encourage a very shy child to talk to you?
Totally, yeah.
And it's the thing I love about him is there's so much nuance in his performance. You've got that side, you've got the side where he pops out of the grave. It's in the beginning of the second version, and he starts to actively take the mickey out of Bill Stutter.
Yes.
And the thing is, Bill doesn't react. He literally just says, without stuttering, "We beat you, we can do it again." And Pennywise literally, he just keeps going, and then when the sequence stops, he literally just goes and shows his teeth, and then it stops. He's doing it partly for himself. He amuses when he talks to Richie in the library. He talks to him as a peer. He says, Richie's busy eyeing up the librarian. He says, "Oh, a bit too old for you. A bit too old, isn't she, Richie?" Or whatever. And he's, so he actually he almost becomes like that worst mate who you really want to go out on the raz with, but no, it's a really bad idea, and you're probably going to end up getting arrested.
Yeah, no, totally. And he there is that kind of bullyish element about him, isn't there? Yeah, it's really interesting. And he kind of he maneuvers very well between being kind of comical and being creepy, and I love all that about Tim Curry's performance in it. It's very good. There are lots of different shades to it. The miniseries, if I'm not mistaken, because you can watch the whole thing now as like a 3-hour thing, right? But it was 2 hour and a half.
Yes, it was. Yes.
Yeah. So it was essentially the kiddie half and the adult half, right?
Yes.
I think most people are in agreement that the first half, in terms of that miniseries, is a lot better.
Yes.
It's scarier. The kids are really good. The second half, I think, is weak, and that's where I'm quite looking forward to watching the new film to see maybe if they can improve on it a little bit. I mean, do you agree with me on that? Am I being too harsh? I think that it's the second half that lets it down with the miniseries.
Okay, yeah, it's to me it's funny. The thing that always got me about the first half is that they were literally, in the same way as happened with things like Stand By Me, they casted character.
Yes.
Jonathan Brandis was, Neverending Story 2 came out kind of the same time. He was very much, this forelocked young American hero. He always looked a bit older in his years, stuff like that. Seth Green as Richie, exactly. It's funny, if you look at old things he'd done in the past, he'd done like a couple of horror films and stuff. He always had that lovely, delicious, shit-eating grin. He was playing the same character a lot of the one who seems to have been the most different to me, because I've actually interviewed all the miniseries.
That's so cool.
The one who seems most different, Marlon Taylor, who is the living embodiment of a bloody what do we call it, Slinky. The guy's so much fun. He never stands still. He's amazing.
Who does he play?
He was Mike, young Mike.
Oh, Mike. Okay.
And yet, in the miniseries, young Mike is actually quite a serious character.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
Whereas the rest of them, Brandon Crane as Ben, who was also in things like the Wonder Years. He said he was a serious kid. The rest of them, they were pretty much playing type, which is the safer way to do it, because that means actors that age, they ain't got the whole professional thing down. The older characters, I'll be honest, threw me a bit, because listening to particularly the audio recordings, the audio commentaries rather, was how they saw it, or it seemed, whether the narrative has changed or not now is another thing entirely. But at the time, most of them saw it as a bit of a paycheck. And I was surprised by the way they talked about it in almost an offhand way.
Right.
The one who didn't, Dennis Christopher, he talked about him in a different way. In a sense, he talks far more about Eddie's trauma. And the funny thing about Eddie, of course, is that he's often seen as this very... because of the whole idea of the asthma / placebo / gazebo, whatever, he's always seen as this complete invalid. And yet one thing that people forget about Book Eddie is the mechanic who shows Bill how to run Silver.
Right.
Eddie is the one with the compass in his head who becomes the limo driver. Eddie's the one who genuinely, when they're getting attacked in the sewers, stands up to Pennywise. Everybody else hides.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And, you know, he actually... despite of that, it's something I kind of got the impression that Dennis Christopher admired Eddie, and that's one thing that I'll be honest with you, I always thought the adult versions were camping.
They were, and I didn't know if they just weren't as strong performers. I mean, obviously John Ritter, everyone knows John Ritter was a great actor, wasn't he? But yeah, there is something about the second half that feels more campy somehow than the first. I don't know what it is. There's that kind of childlike charm to the first half that works, but it somehow doesn't carry over when they're all adults facing off against Tim Curry and everything else. And then there's that terrible big spider monster thing at the end as well.
I mean, it's funny, you know, to be fair, it's I mean, the spider monster, yes, it's bad, but this was, you know, a good 30 years ago.
Yeah, of course, and it was a TV budget, you know, TV rather than film as well, wasn't it?
Exactly. I mean, Tommy Lee Wallace has said, you know, the director has said on record that, you know, no matter how much you had, it would be hard to film that. I mean, they have actually, apparently, the Ritual of Chud, the final battle, is going to be in the second film.
Right.
But it's not even. I mean, the spider monster's bad, and it's actually puppeted to look a bit gormless, which doesn't help. It kind of does this weird thing with its head. It's also very much, I'm afraid, the actors. I mean, there's a close-up on Richard Thomas, who, you know, let's not forget, he was born into an arts family. His parents were ballet dancers, and he was an incredibly bright bloke. He'd done the Waltons, he's done a lot of classical theatre.
Who does Richard Thomas play in it?
Sorry, yes, he's the older Bill.
Right. Gotcha.
And yet, you know, there's a close-up on him when they finally rip the heart out of the spider, and he's doing this most awful gurning, and it just looks so silly. And but there's sometimes the script doesn't help me. There's a bit where Bev finally finds out who wrote the poem, and she's standing there having a sweet little heart-to-heart with the older Ben, and she just starts talking about it, and they're saying, "Is it really you?" And she says, "Why does it hate? Why is it so mean?"
I know. It's something about it doesn't work, does it? And I'm so intrigued to see, you know, you've got some incredible adult actors in the new one, Jessica Chastain and James McAvoy and Bill Hader. I really hope they're going to do it justice, you know, because I think it needs improvement, that second half of the miniseries, unfortunately. But there's a lot to love about that miniseries as well. I have a real nostalgic fondness for it, and it really did creep me out that, you know, it's very kind of episodic. That's the other thing, you know. It's like, you know, present day flashback as each one gets, but you know, again, it's kind of it's nice, and it's a nice series of, you know, to different degrees, sort of scary set pieces, you know, which I quite liked.
Well, exactly. I mean, to be fair, I mean, I suppose, I mean, I get crossed by the bits where I feel it falls flat, but I mean, the adult stuff, I mean, for example, the bits where Richard Thomas as Bill does the quiet bits, and even where he gets angry at the beginning, I was actually really pleased with that, because it shows the less heroic side of the character, and I felt it suited the mood. The bit where you first meet Ben, for example, you know, he's basically contemplating suicide, and you really believe him.
That's right.
It's when they're doing their own individual stuff, they're quite good. It's just when they're doing the big action sequences, it suddenly goes a bit pear-shaped. But then again, to say, for me, it was never about the action sequences. You could strip out all of the supernatural, for me, and it would still work. Because there's obviously the biggest monster is always going to be the one in your head. Yeah,
absolutely. And I suppose there are also, you know, again, if their hearts aren't in it as performers, there's a lot of just talking in the second half, isn't there? There's the whole sequence when they go to the Chinese restaurant, and there's them in the motel, and there's a lot of just, it does just rely on them acting and saying the dialogue, and if it doesn't quite work, then that is going to let the second half down a bit. But I mean, I'm really, it's particularly with that second half that I'm really excited to see what they do with it in the upcoming film.
It's going to be interesting. I think, judging by the trailer, that they're going to go the whole hog in the sense of that. I mean, I wasn't sure because their representations are very different. I mean, one of my big bugbears is that the whole point of the 27-year time shift is that they are going to seed.
Right, yeah.
And now 40 is not really considered anything, to the extent that, you know, one thing that they make quite a big deal of in the book, for example, is that Bill he's gone bald.
Right, yeah.
And he went bald at an early age.
Whereas they're all being played by the most attractive actors in Hollywood.
Exactly. And they don't look... kudos to Andy McKinnon for this one. They don't look traumatised at all.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true.
Exactly. And it's... I think...
Yeah,
I mean,
they've
judging...
aged a bit too well, haven't they?
They have. They're too damn Hollywood. I mean, Bill Hader, I think, is possibly the best choice in the universe for Richie.
Yes. Yes.
I think it's going to be a case of whether they allow it to become this dialogue of they're genuinely facing their own deaths, or whether it's just going to be, hey, it's all right, we saved the planet and now we can just move on and have our babies now. Because, you know, yes, Bev is meant to be... I mean, it's tricky. Jessica Chastain, I'll be honest with you, and I really want to be convinced I'm wrong. She's too damn strong. She's always... The whole point about Bev is in the book, it's not that she has just been beaten up once. This is a woman who's been routinely abused for years, who actually ends up... There's a graphic description in the book about how she gets turned on by being beaten up by her husband, to the extent that when they have make-up sex after he's beaten her, it's her thighs that go quicker and quicker, not his.
Yeah.
And they've got to get that balance and not do the girl power. The thing that worries me about the trailer, over and over again, it's Bev who smashes the mirror, it's Bev who stands up. In the book, she has to be convinced, she has to be made to do this stuff.
Right.
Bill says to her, you've got to do the slingshot, and she keeps on trying to give it back, and he says, no, it's got to be you're the one that can shoot. The whole thing about the films is it's come in the wake of the rise of what detractors call identity politics. Hence, you know, it's funny when people talk about so much of the marketing has gone on the basis of who the losers are. People don't know.
No.
If I asked 5 different people, it's okay, massive book point here.
Yeah.
If I asked 5 different people, okay, what makes Ben a loser? If you ask the people who've seen the new film, you're probably going to get a toss-up between he's fat or he's a new kid in town.
Yeah.
Notice in the film, you see with the young Ben in particular, he goes swimming, he's, you know, down to his boxers like all the rest of them are.
Yeah.
In the book, you would never ever see Ben in anything less than a sweatshirt.
Right, yeah, that's it. Yeah. Let's get to the film actually in a minute. Yeah, it's interesting. Just briefly wrapping up the miniseries, how do you think it's aged? I mean, it feels like it's quite a thing that a lot of us, or a lot of people of a certain generation, really remember fondly growing up and watching for the first time. But how do you think it's aged, you know, however many, nearly 30 years on?
I think it's actually done quite well, in the sense of, if you look at the performances, particularly of Tim Curry, is absolutely amazing.
Tim Curry is what carries it in some ways, isn't he? Yeah.
Oh, exactly. I mean, to be honest with you, I teach this to my students every year.
Right.
And
right.
They actually find Tim Curry's version a lot scarier.
I'm so glad of that. Yeah. That's good.
Oh, definitely good. But it's again, a lot of people are going to hate that. But it's, you know, they find the lack of pyrotechnics, particularly in the early section, is what sells it. And particularly things like the group activities like the Dam in the Barrens, which doesn't in the book, of course, Bev isn't there. It's very much a boy's own thing.
Yes.
But they find, people find the idea of that childhood is what carries it. I tend to find that, to be honest with you, the people who get snitty about the spider at the end, generally speaking, film critics and people who like to think themselves in the know and in the know about special effects.
Yeah.
We're being too hard
in
some ways, because that's it takes the what's it out of it a little bit, but the essential story is still there, and that is what people remember.
Yeah, totally. It's true. And I think because it is less flashy and showy, and it doesn't have, like you say, all the pyrotechnics, I think in that regard it has aged well, because you just watch Tim Curry in that terrifying makeup doing his terrifying thing, and it works, and it will always work. Yeah. Let's talk about... Very briefly, I want to ask you about the audiobook as well. You're a fan of the audiobook, aren't you?
Massively.
I have not yet started it, but I've just downloaded it. And so, Charlie, my aim, and it's 44 hours long, but I'm going to listen to it between now and hopefully seeing chapter 2. And then if we reconvene, I'll then be able to talk to you about the audiobook, because I'm really excited to listen to it. But you're a fan, right?
It's absolutely amazing.
The clown held a bunch of balloons, all colors, like gorgeous ripe fruit in one hand. In the other, he held George's newspaper boat. "Want your boat, Georgie?" The clown smiled. George smiled back. He couldn't help it. It was the kind of smile you just had to answer. "I sure do," he said. The clown laughed. "I sure do. That's good. That's very good. And how about a balloon?"
It's the thing I love about it. It's very performed.
Yes.
In the sense of, there's two different audiobooks. The main one is released by Audible, and it's the Stephen Webber version, which is the kind of considered the official one.
Yes.
There was one recorded by a very famous narrator called George Guidall.
Right.
Way back in the day for the National Library of Congress.
Okay.
And he very, very well-known reader. I don't know. I haven't been able to track him down, I must be honest. I've really tried, but you can tell at first he's they do what's called rock and roll, in the sense of completely by the seat of the pants when they're doing audiobooks. Some people like Stephen Webber already knew of the story.
Right, yeah.
It was recorded after the miniseries and everything. People like Guido maybe not, because it's their main living. And so he will literally, he probably had a vague overview, but he will likely have just been, rock and roll is whereby you literally record like a page or two or three. And then you stop and you have a breather. So it's literally, you're learning the story as you go along.
Yes.
I'll be honest, I think the Guido version is actually scarier.
Right, interesting.
He brings the characters in slowly, and it means that Pennywise is very, very subtle at first, and it really is just like when he meets Georgie. I'll be honest, I remember having to turn it off when I first heard it, because it's like you're listening to a paedophile about to attack a kid.
Oh my God.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
And things like the characterizations at first when he's doing Bill, the stutters, for example, come out very robotically.
Yes.
Whereas with the Webber version, what I love, okay, seriously, trust me on this, guys, if you download it, do not, I repeat, do not listen to this on loudspeaker. Trust me, you will thank me for this. Because when you get to bits like Richie's speeches, he really goes for it, and you do get a very, to his credit, because he is reading exactly what's there, you get this very inappropriate old stereotype of what certain types of people are meant to be seen as.
Right, yeah.
When he gets to the sequence where Bev goes back home, he really does end up screaming up at the top of his voice, "I want to suck your plump cunt."
Amazing.
He does it, and he actually, because at that point, what's happening in the book is Pennywise, or it rather, is swapping between a number of different characters. And to his absolute credit, Webber literally swaps it between, again, an Irish accent. Pennywise is very, very, high-up in American drawl, through to Bev, through to this kind of vaguely European accent for the old woman. And he does it brilliantly, and because of that, you get a sense of how important King is in the storytelling tradition, because all of a sudden it becomes very immediate.
Right.
You have to listen. It's not like a book where you can literally think, shit, didn't get that, go back to that paragraph.
You
can't sketch back like that in audiobooks.
You can't. You
have to be in the moment. It literally changes what's known as your parasocial environment. And it actually gets scary when he does Bill. You feel for that kid, because you cannot skip ahead. If you skip ahead, you don't know what the hell's going on anymore.
Yeah, that's so true. Oh, that's exciting. I can't wait to get stuck in. I really enjoyed, I listened to Michael C. Hall's Pet Sematary as well. Yeah, loved that.
Okay.
Loved that.
That's on my list. I didn't know he'd done that. I love Michael C.
Yeah,
Hall.
Michael Sawyer does it brilliantly. So yeah, do check out. He does Pet Sematary audiobook. It's brilliant. Yeah, excellent. All right, good. All right, well, let's finish off by talking about It Chapter 1 then, because this came out 2 years ago, 2017.
Bill, if you'll come with me, you'll float too. You'll float too. You'll float too. You'll float too. You'll float too.
We've got Chapter 2 coming out in a couple of weeks. What did you think of this when you first saw it?
Oh, this is awkward. When I... oh, hell.
Because it was huge, right? It was a huge hit. It made so much money. It's like, commercially one of the more successful horror movies of the decade, I think.
Very much. I mean, it broke ratings and God knows what else.
Yes, exactly.
When I first saw it, because for me, I'll be honest with you, when I first saw it, I was busy doing reviews for outlets like Starburst and Sci-Fi Now, and I was trying to keep my professional head on. At the same time, I had just got my book deal, and I couldn't tell anybody.
So when you watched this, you knew you were going to be writing this book.
Yes,
okay,
I
interesting.
hadn't been allowed, because we were still talking about contracts.
Yeah,
and it was literally I was on the verge of popping, and I watched it in the middle of the BFI and surrounded by people. I howled my blooming eyes out at the end, because somebody who Anna Bogutskaya, who was working at the BFI and since gone on to other things. She's amazing.
She is amazing. She's been on this podcast many times, actually, so I'm sure people will be familiar with her. Yeah,
exactly. She'd helped me a lot to sort the deal out and stuff. She came. I was just a mess. I was just crying on everything. But for me, it was initially far more about just seeing the story up there and seeing something vaguely approximating King as King is, not the kind of light-hearted version that often gets out into the mainstream. Actually see that getting out into the public, because I've always seen King as this incredible humanitarian, not as a horror writer, who actually is very appropriate for now. And I think the reason why with the film, the kid cast are very, very good indeed. I think
they're brilliant. Yeah.
Oh, they're fantastic. I mean, if you look at Jaden Lieberher, as was now called Jaden Martell, as Bill. I mean, he's a fantastic actor. He's been in things like Midnight Special and other bits. Right near the beginning and right at the end, Bill repeats the phrase, he thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghosts.
Yes.
And, realised last night, it's never explained why.
No.
And all this stuff, if you know the story, you're there.
Yeah.
And because of that, a lot of it, I think the reason why the film went down so well is because it was like a Stranger Things Mark II.
Yeah.
With the iconic scary clown, with that brilliant marketing stroke, anybody can do that makeup.
Yeah,
it's
right.
So easy.
It's so true. Yeah. What did you think of that? Because they did make a few changes, right, to the original text. In some ways, is it less loyal to the original text than the miniseries is? Would you say?
It depends. I mean, what way in particular were you thinking? Because there's a lot of changes.
Well, yeah. I mean, they've changed. Obviously, they've changed it from 50s setting to 80s, haven't they? So they've updated it in that regard.
Yes.
I'm sure part of that is also to cash in on that Stranger Things kind of vibe, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's even
completely
got one of the main kids from Stranger Things in it.
Yeah, Finn Wolfhard. Yeah.
What did you think of what they did with the Mike character? Because they changed quite a lot about him, it seemed like, and they've made Ben the historian and that kind of thing, haven't they? I felt like they'd taken away a lot of what made Mike interesting, which is a shame. Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, in the it's funny. I mean, in the miniseries, Marlon Taylor's Mike at least had his slight gorehoundishness.
Yes.
The thing that both of them remove, he's also a very funny character.
Right.
He regularly knocks about with Richie.
Yes.
I thought I'll be honest with you. I thought you may want to cut this bit out. I'll be honest, I don't think Chosen Jacobs had perhaps matured enough for that role.
Yeah.
I also felt he wasn't particularly helped because they had removed so much of the character. He becomes a cipher black kid.
He does, yeah. It's really weird. It's kind of, kind of gone backwards, really, considering it's supposed to be a very much an update, a very of now kind of adaptation. They reduced him to something that was almost tokenistic or something. It was weird.
Well, this is what they've done, because it's weird in the advent of so-called identity politics, where everybody is so aware of intersectionality, that is, the different ways in which you may have things work against you because of your background.
Yeah.
Bev, because all of a sudden everybody's now about feminism and about being survivors. What you see, the stuff that you see in the film with her kicking her dad, does not happen in the book.
No, yeah.
Literally, the only thing you get in the book is he asks her, "Have you been a slut child?" And she says no. And at one point, her mum, Elfrida, says, "Has your dad ever touched you?" And she says, "What do you mean touched me? Of course he's touched me." She doesn't know. It's only ever implied. Ever. What they do in the film, where you actually see her pulling away and kicking him and smacking him, that all came from, I think it was the second draft of the script.
Right, yeah.
And they have added that because obviously it goes into the whole feminism thing we're on at the moment. Ben, similarly, any mention of the losers making any reference to his weight, gone. The bullies do it.
Right.
They don't.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean they switched them all. I mean if you look at, oh gosh, who else is there? If you look at, say, Stan, and you think, well, okay, what makes him a loser? And you're kind of thinking, well, is it because he's a Jew?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's never really made clear. They've made it wishy-washy, because nobody, again, if you're going to start, I mean, in the book, Stan actually says, "I don't even know what being a Jew means." The one who's religious is Richie.
Right, yeah. And there was a little mention of that in the film about Richie's Jewishness, but not much, yeah.
Richie's Christian.
Yeah, right.
He's meant to be Christian. In the book, he goes to Sunday school every week.
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, Stan is a character, because remind me, I mean, what is Stan's thing in the book? Because I feel like he was kind of underserved in both adaptations so far.
In the book, it's not that he's Jewish, it's the fact that he's a scientist. The whole thing about empirical...
That's completely gone from the adaptations, yeah.
I mean, in the miniseries, it was Ben Heller, the guy who played the younger Stan. I mean, lovely bloke, by the way.
Oh, really?
Really is such a sweetheart.
Yeah.
When he does signings, he always does the not empirically possible thing for signings.
Oh, yes, that's right. He does say that. Yeah.
In the film, I think it's basically a case of that, oh God, they're going to understand what empiricism is. Well, it's bloody weird because we now have Wikipedia and yet people can't fucking use it. What the hell?
Yeah.
The whole idea of, in the film they make it so that he doesn't like dirt, which does crop up in the book.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And it says, he's described as being like the world's smallest adult.
Right.
And yet in the film it's just kind of because they evidently don't want to get accused of anti-Semitism. Because the whole thing about the book is that he isn't religious. His trust is literally in the world around him.
Oh yeah.
And it's like once that's gone, he's literally, my theory on why he commits suicide is not fear. It's because he just literally thinks this proves that everything we know about the world is wrong. There are no rules. We have no hope. And that is why he literally, in one of the interesting things about the film, I think about the adult film, is that sequence in Jade of the Orient that they go to.
Yes.
In the book, they've all done all the chit chat and everything, when they've gone back, and they I think it's Bill actually says, somebody talk about something, talk about President Kennedy, talk about anything, just don't let us have the conversation we've got to have now. And in passing, it's actually said that Eddie actually says, ask Mike what's happened to Stan. And Mike then says, well, when I was doing the ring around, he's killed himself. He killed himself last night. In the film, automatically, they're making Pennywise more powerful because as was shown in the teaser that was released for the second film, they have all the chat and everything, and then they say, well, okay, what's happened to Stan? And that's when they bring out the fortune cookies, and the fortune cookies actually form, they've all been messed by Pennywise, and they say basically Stan isn't here. And so automatically it's giving more power to Pennywise. Having said that, I'll be honest, the thing that's worrying me badly about this is they are evidently updating the cosmology and the mythos, because in the book you've got this basic idea that Pennywise is just a guise of this demon alien entity thing called It.
Exactly.
That's meant to be prehistoric.
Yes.
The whole idea of Pennywise the dancing clown is just a guise, in the same way that leper, bog grape.
Exactly. It's just one of its forms that it takes. Yeah.
Whereas in the trailer, you see a sequence where you see somebody ripping off the Pennywise makeup. Now, and you see also in the sequence where Bev goes to see Mrs. Kirsch, she talks about something that's basically been changed from the book. In the book, the creature that chases Bev around says, "My father was my mother," and it just gets very surreal before she starts talking about sucking cunts. In the film version, Kirsch actually shows Bev an old black and white photo of her as a little girl standing with this guy, who is obviously Bill Skarsgård, Pennywise, without makeup, standing in front of a caravan saying "Amazing Dancing Clown." Yes. And it looks as though they're going to make it so that he's chosen a particular host. Now, my worry about that is that it will formulate into far less about the cosmology and far less about them actually overcoming their own odds, and far more about just
defeating a clown.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's true. I think, you let's talk about Bill Skarsgård in comparison to Tim Curry, and also in comparison to Pennywise in the book, I suppose. But it's as this story has evolved through its adaptations, it's become much more a clown film, right?
Yes.
It is. Yeah, and I think, like we talked about at the very beginning, this is about a lot more than this. And I think the one thing I wasn't so keen on, to be honest, in It Chapter 1 was the clown, was Bill Skarsgård. And I don't know whether I've got such a nostalgic place in my heart for the Tim Curry version. But they did make him a lot more monstrous in the kind of traditional sense. There's a bit more CGI, and there's a bit more, he does that thing where he moves very, very fast towards every...
Again and again.
Exactly. We don't need to see that every time he attacks somebody. I don't know... Oh, people are not going to like me saying this, but I don't know if I liked Bill Skarsgård. I don't know if I liked his delivery of the lines and stuff. Again, maybe it's just because in my head I so associate it with Tim Curry. But it's almost the exact opposite strengths and weaknesses for me to the miniseries, because I love all of the stuff in between the clown. I love the kids, I love the dialogue, I love the interaction, I love the human drama.
Yes.
I think that is so well performed and so well played in the film compared to the miniseries. But the clown, the horror for me isn't there. But I'm hoping it's going to be there in the second half. But yeah, they've clearly, I wonder what they're going to do when it comes to, for example, the big spider monster and that kind of thing. And if they're gonna take all that away and keep it more as this is a clown and that's it, I don't know.
Oh, Honeykin, you've not been looking at your Funkos. They've already, I'm pretty sure, unless, because I must admit I haven't looked into this in great detail, there are pictures floating about on the net already of a collectible that's got the kind of spider thingadoodle with the Pennywise head flipped down to like a bib, which actually looks really reasonably realistic.
Oh, cool.
But,
nice. Well, yeah, I've got to admit, I've stayed fairly kind of, I haven't even watched the trailer yet for Chapter 2, so I've stayed fairly kind of sullied. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, to me, I found Tim Curry's version scary because it felt like an adult basically fucking with you.
Right, exactly, yeah.
With the Skarsgård version, it's partially, I felt it showed too much. I didn't like seeing... The first time I saw the trailer where you see the whole kind of running towards the camera thing, first time it worked. Yes. After that, it's and again. But it's more than that. I'll be honest, I'm very much of the tribe that thinks, oh, yeah, Jordan, it sounds like Scooby-Doo, which breaks the illusion for me. But I love I know they've been using the whole thing of, it nearly drove him insane. Is he coming back for 2 as a marketing ploy? I just didn't really see it. I mean, I just didn't. I thought he was at his best when he was quiet.
Yeah, me too. Really good when he's quiet. Yeah. When you just see him standing there, it's scary. It's scary until he does anything, until he opens his mouth.
Well, yeah, because to be honest with you, the thing that always got me about it is there's this thing of, okay, what can he actually do? I mean, in the sense of when he goes after Richie and Stan.
Yeah.
The kids are shitting their pants anyway.
Yeah.
Stop playing with your food and bloody eat. He just fannies about.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's true. I always think that, considering how quickly he chows down on Georgie.
Exactly.
You know? yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know. And I'm sure that it's, I'm an adult now compared to when I was a child and I watched Tim Curry, and I'm sure it's all subjective, and I'm sure It Chapter 1 terrified a whole new audience and a younger generation. But it's interesting that you say a lot of your students still find Tim Curry's scarier.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I have a terrible habit. It's bloody awful for a cinema critic. I get far too into films. I will be the one who screams. Yay!
Well, I love that though, and I hope it, and I love it when a film does truly terrify me. I'm all for it. I want to be scared by these movies, and I wanted to be a little bit more scared than I was with It Chapter 1, which is a shame.
I didn't really get scared. I mean, this is the thing. I think I could be. The problem that I found so much with this version is it ends up being so much about we love clowns. It actually anaesthetises the character. I suspect that's actually purposeful.
Yes.
I'm beginning to think, judging by some of the poster art, that they're actually the second film is actually going to be played differently because the marketing's a lot more adult.
Yeah, well, that's it now. It's like they've done their scary clown movie, maybe, and maybe It Chapter 2 is going to be weird, and there's that. I suppose there's that interesting idea that Chapter 1 could almost be, like a kid's film, or, like you're watching an episode of Stranger Things, and now we're moving into adult territory, and things are about to get weirder and skeezier and more adult and more trippy and out there, and I hope that's the case. Yeah.
I think so, to be honest. I mean, they've released a poster today on Barbara Moschetti's Instagram, and it's two of them at the back. I think it's Ben and I think Eddie at the back, with Bev, Jessica Chastain slightly further away at the front, and because the focus is very much on them as opposed to on the clown, I think that I suspect they're also going to begin to emphasise the acting chops of the actors, because of course Jessica Chastain, the whole kind of Oscar buzz, James McAvoy as well, they're all very, with the exception of, and I'm sorry, but Old Spice guy Isaiah Mustafa as Mike, they're all people who are reasonably well proven, whereas with the kids, only really, you had Finn Wolfhard as Richie, who was known by Stranger Things. Apart from that, only really Jaden Martell was, and say things like Midnight Special. And also things like St. Vincent opposite Bill Murray. Yes. And he really, to hold your own against Bill Murray, come on, you're 11, you're a god.
Yeah, amazing. I know, absolutely amazing. Yeah.
And I think they're gonna work on that. 'Cause, the other thing is, of course, with the first film, I really thought that they'd lied about not getting the kids to record bits for the second film. I thought, of course they'll do it. Because, of course, when the first film came out, the second film was not supposedly guaranteed.
I know. It's so hard to believe that, isn't it? But I guess, because they did go back and they have actually filmed the scenes with the kids since, haven't they? Where they've had to de-age them.
Exactly.
So that's really interesting, because you do think, well, why wouldn't they have just bloody done them back then? But anyway, maybe they hadn't thought about it yet. But yeah, it's really interesting.
I wonder, actually, if it's the case of, depending on how much they had to de-age them, I'm wondering if it's the case that extra so many months of maturity, because they must have matured so much, potentially helped the performances. Because I'll be honest, even, people are going to hate me for this, but even when you look at Finn Wolfhard as Richie, I think, he seems a little bit light. Apart from one sequence, but he's funny as hell, don't get me wrong. The sequence where they're near the posters and he has the business with the guy from the band in the background, is fuffing about with the trombones. Hilarious. It's beautiful slapstick. But when you look at, apart from the non-canonical fight he has with Bill, where he's actually far more like the Richie of the book, who is the only one who can say to Bill, snap out of it, you're being a dick. Maybe I suspect that it's given them all a little bit more time to mature, because let's face it, otherwise you're asking 14, 15-year-olds to not only act, but to act something deeply traumatic.
Yeah.
And also incredibly bonkers.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot going on, like you say, in this story. So to ask children to kind of get all of that across is a thing, isn't it? It's a big thing.
Exactly. It's a massive ask, and it may mean it's, they've had a little bit more time to incubate.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I love there are certain images I really loved. I watched it again, and I can't remember whether I noticed it first time round, but when Ben is in the library and the old lady librarian, did you see? I loved that, like her kind of staring at him, sort of gone weirdly sort of Pennywise in her facial expressions, just kind of slightly out of focus in the background. And there were moments like that I loved about the film, and there are some chilling images, definitely.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. But to be honest with you, it's bizarre, because again, it's something that doesn't happen in the book, but the bit where Ben is then attacked by the egg boy.
Yes.
That I have a thing about kind of robotic movement anyway, but that did give me the willy.
yeah, exactly. And it's just very and I think this links to what you were saying as well about the fact that these adult actors, they're going to have, they look amazing for their age. They're Hollywood stars. There's something just very glossy about these films, isn't there? That's the thing, and maybe that's the problem I have with the first one as well, is that it's maybe a bit too glossy and shiny for me. Which I wish it wasn't, but obviously I know that they had to do that, and it was a huge commercial success, probably because of all those reasons, because it is very glossy and very easy to watch and very bright and shiny and breezy as well.
It is. It's one thing that I kind of feel quite sorry for Nicholas Hamilton, who, as I say, was Henry.
Yeah.
He didn't. It's one thing I noticed a lot on the director and producer's Instagram. They made a lot of fuss of him, because other people really weren't, because he is the one who is allowed to look scuffed up.
Yes.
I mean, for fuck's sake, they give him a bloody thingamadoodle. Can't think what the word is now. Mullet.
Yeah. He's got a proper mullet. Yeah.
Well, exactly. I mean, they actually said that was the only way they could get the character to look right, because until then he just looked too damn normal.
Yeah. Right.
And his acting in it is fantastic.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
I mean, when you look at particularly, and it's not even the showy stuff, it's when you see him after the apocalyptic rock fight, and he just looks so damn injured.
Yeah.
And he's literally the only one who's really allowed to.
Yeah.
I mean, Bill, for God's sake, even when he's having his moments, is still shot at a Dutch angle.
Right,
he's still always put as a hero.
Yeah.
And it would just be nice if they levelled it all out of it, because the whole idea is that in the end story, and that they have actually said that it will still retain something of a bittersweet ending, whether that means that the additional characters who may not make it out don't make it out.
Yeah.
I'm really hoping it does. I suspect it will. I mean, we know that one of them isn't going to make it, because we've already seen in the trailer that there is an image of a hand.
Oh, cool.
But I'm really hoping I don't just make it all and they all lived happily ever after.
Yeah.
That is not the book.
That's not the story, exactly. Well, let's hope. Very excited.
I'm gonna pop.
I know. Not long to wait now. Charlie, thank you so much. Where can people find you out there if they want to come and have a go at you about your opinions on things on Twitter or something?
Oh, come on, if you think you're hard enough.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been waiting 27 years for this try.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm on Facebook, I am on Twitter, and I will shortly have a whole new brand spanking website.
Exciting.
I've done technology for this. That's how much it matters.
Oh, amazing. Amazing.
When it goes live, I apologise in advance, because you will get the apocalypse. It's been nice knowing you.
Brilliant. Can't wait. Charlie, thank you so much.
Thank you.